I'm here.
Director Greta Connie,
Yes.
Director Tess Albin Smith,
Here.
Director Scott Ignacio,
Here.
Director John Haschak,
Here.
Director Mike Carter,
Here.
Director Tasha. Okay, Director Tasha Alstrand with Calstrans,
Here.
and Chair Dan Jurdy.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to convene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency and then immediately recess as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. On the consent calendar, we have adoption of a resolution making continued findings for the remote meetings and then also approval of the October 3rd minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I have a question
Go ahead.
on item 4. I know that there's going to be some changes take place the first of the year. So should we agendize this for next month's meeting to adopt like that? I think it's a 3-year plan that the governor's put forth regarding live and online meetings.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, we are anticipating that the conditions that this resolution is adopted under will be changing after the first of the year. So we're talking internally about how to approach that, knowing that board members want to have some flexibility about attending in person or remotely. But so we will plan on something discussion at the next meeting.
Okay, would someone like to make a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I would just like to follow up to Jim's question. We just went through this at LAFCO this morning.
Yeah.
And 361's been extended till March 1st. That's when this new option comes in, but there's going to be some caveats in there because you can only use it for remote, like depending on how many times we meet a year. If we meet monthly and don't take any pauses, we can do it up to 3 times a year. But if we do it less than monthly, there's these caveats and rules between what's allowed and what's not allowed. So I would encourage that it stays on and we act on it before the new members come in.
Yeah, I concur. And after that being said, I'll motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll second that.
Okay, do we have any public comment on the consent calendar?
Not seeing any, and we did not receive any written public comment prior to the meeting.
All right, well then can we have a roll call?
Yes, Director Brown,
Yes.
Director Connie,
Yes.
Director Albin Smith,
Yes.
Director Ignacio,
Yes.
Director Haschak,
Yes.
Director Carter,
Yes. Yes.
Director Alstrand,
Yes.
and Chair Jurdy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, now we have public expression on non-agenda items. Do we have any members of the public who wish to address the council on items not on today's agenda? Okay, I see hand raised by Dave Speck.
Thank you, Chair Jurdy. Just briefly, my compliments to Board Member Tasha Alstrand, who followed up with me on a query that I made at the last meeting. Thank you, Tasha, for doing that. And also, I wanted to say thanks again to this group of people for your support in the active transportation program pursuit for the Wallala Downtown Streetscape Master Plan. Fingers crossed. And then thanks again.
Okay, well, thank you. Are there any other public comments on non-agenda items? Okay, not seeing any. We'll go on to the regular calendar, and we have presentation and acceptance of Transportation Development Act triennial audits.
I'll speak to that. You have my written staff reports. We have 2 audits we're reporting today for MCOG as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency and Mendocino Transit Authority as the operator. And according to the Transportation Development Act, we are required to have an independent audit, a performance audit of each of those entities. And so we have our contractor here, Moore and Associates. Kathy Chambers is with us to give a presentation of the results. And we're pleased to have another favorable report for both of the agencies. And our staff recommendation is to receive the presentation and accept both of those audit reports. Are there any questions on the process? We did have a procurement of the consultant, and the board had approved that choice some months back, I believe. And so Moore and Associates have been working hard at it over the past few months. So I'll introduce Ms. Kathy Chambers, our consultant, and she wants to share the screen to give her PowerPoint presentation. And I think you can do that, Kathy.
Yes.
There you go.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. As Janet mentioned, my name is Kathy Chambers, and my firm, Moore and Associates, was engaged by the Mendocino Council of Governments to prepare TDA Triennial Performance Audits of MCOG as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency and of Mendocino Transit Authority as the transit operator. So a triennial performance audit is a requirement for the RTPA and operators receiving funding under the Transportation Development Act. The purpose of the audit is to confirm compliance with the elements of the TDA, as well as review the functions and performance of each entity. This is significantly different from a fiscal audit. So these audits cover 3 fiscal years, 2018-19, 2019-20, and 2020-21. The audit process itself is pretty straightforward. Each entity is provided a list of requested data. We start with a desk review of the data, as well as an initial review of compliance. A site visit enables us to ask follow-up questions about the data, any potential compliance issues, and the implementation status of recommendations from the prior audit. We also cover a series of functional areas outlined in Caltrans Performance Audit Guidebook. This year, the site visits were conducted virtually via Zoom. Each entity is provided the opportunity to review its draft report prior to finalization, followed by any desired presentation. And once everything has been finalized, the RTPA will certify completion of the audits to Caltrans. So I won't review everything on this slide, but this gives you an idea of the types of things reviewed as part of the RTPA compliance review. Some of the elements include making sure funding is allocated and claimed as a portion, policies and procedures for TDA claims are in place. There's an active social service transportation advisory council. Effective operator oversight is being provided. Fiscal audits and state controller reports are completed each year, and TDA funds are withheld from operators when necessary. We use 2 types of findings and recommendations in our triennial performance audits. Compliance findings and recommendations refer to issues specific to compliance elements. Functional findings and recommendations look at the bigger picture and often include opportunities for improvements to efficiency and performance. So I'm happy to say that the Mendocino Council of Governments had no compliance findings. We did elect to waive 2 findings due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Completion timelines for the operator fiscal audit for 2018-19 and the prior triennial performance audit coincided with the beginning of the pandemic and the stay-at-home order, which affected both the RTPA and the external auditors, tasked with the work. We did identify 1 functional finding intended to improve the function of the organization. We noted that the fiscal audit for MTA does not include details regarding the MTA's operating and capital reserve funds. This refers to reserve funds maintained by MTA, not the capital reserves maintained by MCOG. We recommended information about these funds be included as part of the MTA's annual fiscal audit, and it was included as a finding for MCOG since it is responsible for the audit contract. It was also included as a recommendation for MTA, which we'll review in a moment. Shifting gears to the operator audit, the compliance review of the operator is a little bit different than that of the RTPA. Once again, I won't review everything on this slide, but some of the elements include on-time submittal of external reports to the state controller, satisfactory terminal inspection ratings by the CHP, compliance with farebox recovery ratio requirements, use of the TDA definition of certain performance indicators, justification for significant increases in the operating budget, and compliance with the RTPA's rules for submitting TDA claims. As with the RTPA, we elected to waive a compliance finding for the late submittal of MTA's fiscal audit for 2018-19 due to the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. We did have one compliance finding, the fiscal year 2018-19 state controller report, which was due January 31st, 2020, was submitted more than 2 months late. Since it was due prior to the start of the pandemic, we did not elect to waive this finding. However, since the 2 subsequent reports were submitted on time, this does not appear to be an issue for which MTA needs to take any action at this time. We identified 2 functional findings intended to improve the effectiveness of the organization. Each of these findings was accompanied by a recommendation. The first functional finding looked at the farebox recovery ratio, which stood just above the 10% threshold prior to the pandemic. It's important to note that this is not a compliance issue, as MTA was in compliance prior to the pandemic. And then penalties for non-compliance were waived through fiscal year 2022-23. We felt it was important to call this out, however, because we are in the last year for which penalties are being waived. And beginning next fiscal year, MTA will once again be responsible for meeting its farebox ratio requirements. That said, there were other changes to how the farebox ratio is calculated that should offer a solution to this problem. Namely, Assembly Bill 149 stated that non-state grant revenues could be counted toward the farebox ratio. This includes federal funding, whether from the CARES Act or through Section 5311. Being able to include this revenue should keep MTA well above the 10% threshold for the foreseeable future. The second functional finding will look familiar, as it was the one included in the RTPA audit. Again, it's not a compliance finding because we found no concerns under the TDA about MTA maintaining reserve funds. However, the MTA does need to ensure that those funds are handled consistent with its own policies, which require board review of contributions and withdrawals. Therefore, we recommended information about the reserve account be included within MTA's annual fiscal audit. 2 pieces of legislation passed since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, Assembly Bills 90 and 149, have provided relief measures such as waivers from penalties for not meeting farebox recovery ratio requirements for fiscal years 2019-20 through 2022-23. These relief measures have been essential for transit operators navigating the pandemic. However, 2 additional components of AB 149 are expected to have more impact in the long term. First, as I referenced earlier, the term local supplementation has been expanded to include any non-state grant funds or revenues. Operators have been able to use local funds to supplement their fare revenues in calculating the farebox recovery ratio. Under AB 149, federal funds can now be counted as local supplementation, providing a significant new source of fare revenue. While this doesn't change the amount of funding the operator receives, it does positively impact the farebox recovery ratio by changing what can be counted as fare revenue, thereby positively impacting compliance with the TDA. The other major change under AB 149 is the expansion of what expenses can be excluded from operating costs for the purposes of calculating the farebox recovery ratio. These now include expenses related to microtransit, ticketing systems, security, some pension contributions, service planning, and the transition to zero-emission vehicles. These exclusions serve to reduce the operating cost used in the farebox recovery ratio calculation. So while they don't increase funding to transit operators, these 2 changes help to increase the farebox recovery ratio by changing the balance of revenues to expenses used in the calculation. This helps transit operators remain in compliance with the TDA and therefore be able to claim the full amount of their allocation without any penalties for failing to meet farebox recovery requirements. So in summary, both the RTPA and operator have done a good job remaining in compliance with the TDA, even in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. We believe the recommendations presented in the audit will have a positive effect on both agencies moving forward. So I'll be happy to take any questions at this time.
I have a question,
Yes.
Kathy. Well, it's more of a comment. I believe that first of all, Jacob King is currently on, and he could explain, if you haven't already, what happened in 2020. There was a big change over in the head staff, and Jacob took over. So there's probably a delay on some of the paperwork. That was the only thing I was thinking. And as you said, it has been on time since then.
Right. And so while I had to note it as a finding because it did happen, you know, I don't see it as a problem because it has been resolved since then. So finding yes, problem no, no further action needs to be taken. I think, you know, MTA is in good shape there.
I have a question for Jacob, if he could. Yeah. Several years ago, the MTA started to sell ads on the buses, and I believe the revenues were higher than conservatively budgeted originally. So, you know, I think it's been a successful program as far as revenues. And my understanding is that those revenues could count towards the fare box ratio match. And I guess I'm a little concerned that we're just barely above the fare box ratio match when the fact that we've added in that new source of revenue to provide for that match. Is it strictly COVID loss of passengers? I mean, it seems like, shouldn't we be fairly comfortably above the fare box ratio with that revenue in?
Very good question. I believe we were already kind of going down in years prior to the pandemic. There was a trend. I can't say that that's improved, obviously, since the pandemic. You are right. We have received this advertising fare revenue. We have put that towards our operating reserve. And it does actually help us on that fare box ratio. As Kathy Chambers explained, we are not in a bad place. In our recovery, we will be able to take some of our federal funds and put those towards our fare box ratio, and it'll give us a buffer. Hopefully, it couldn't have came at a better time, I guess, as it were. But looking forward and seeing an upward trend in ridership now. One other blaring thing that was going on here at MTA is the lack of a short-range transit plan. We hadn't had one done since 2012, something that we are RFPing for now. So I think that'll be able to identify things that we're doing right and things that we've been doing wrong, identify underperforming routes, and maybe how to change some of our operations to possibly get some new ridership.
Okay, yeah, so I mean, I could be wrong with the numbers, but I think that for several years, the fare box ratio for MTA was something like 12 or more pennies per dollar, maybe higher than that. And
14.7, I think, was the grandfather number.
Close to 15 cents. And that again that was without the ad revenue in the mix. And so I'm just kind of curious, where are we if we were to look at the at the true fare box revenue as a percentage of our operating costs? Would we be, I don't know, down to 8 or 7 cents on the dollar? I'm just kind of curious where and how have we gone from close to 15 cents to something like 8 or 7 cents on the dollar from the actual fare box revenues?
So currently, we are extremely low. We're just about 50% of our ridership. So roughly 50% of our fare box currently. So it's if we weren't getting bailed out by the AB 149, we would be in dire straits at this point. We'd have to be rethinking everything right this minute to get us back on track. Not saying that we aren't. We have made some improvements. We have added some of our routes back to pre-pandemic levels. not everything. We are still dealing with the driver shortage. I think those are also contributors to getting passengers back. When you think of a route not starting, such as the 5 and 4 Bragg, not starting at 7 a.m., but starting at 10 a.m., that does have a steep impact on our ridership. Things that we're hoping to improve. We have seen improvements in just about every other location other than Fort Bragg. And I think that is, to your point, it is one of those things that puts us at that lower level and not recovering our fare box.
Any other questions? Director Connie?
Jacob, am I correct that November is no fare month?
It is no fare.
All right, so it's important for all of us to remind our constituents that they should cut back on the bus and help rebuild that ridership.
Thank you for pointing that out. And I think that will draw our choice riders back to transit. I think we need to let folks understand that transit's still there, transit's clean, and we're still operating at least 80% of what we were and growing.
Okay, do we have any members of the public wishing to comment on this agenda item? Okay, not seeing any. Would it be appropriate to have a motion now, or do we have another presentation?
We could take a motion now. You could move to accept both if you like. And I'll just note that the full reports are in the board agenda packet posted online. You should all have received that.
I'll make a motion to approve the recommended action.
I'll second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Can
And
we
that's
have
for both of the 2 audit reports, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. I'll call the vote if you're ready. Director Brown?
Yes.
Director Connie?
Yes.
Director Alban Smith?
Yes.
Director Ignacio?
Yes.
Director Haschak?
Yes.
Director Carter?
Yes. Yes.
Director Alstrand?
Yes.
And Chair Jurdy.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries. Thank you, Kathy, for coming over today and presenting that material. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think that takes us to item number 8, which is approval of internal cash flow loans for construction phase of the Covelo State Route 162 Multipurpose Trail.
Yeah, thank you. So I will start this. It's also just a project update, and then Janet will get into the details of the cash flow portion of the item. So for the Covelo State Route 162 Corridor Multipurpose Trail Project, I think most of you know that we are under contract with Ghirardelli for construction engineering services. And then we are currently in the advertising period for the construction contract itself. Your staff report says that bids will be opened on November 15th. However, since the time the staff report has written, we have extended that period. Bid opening is now scheduled for November 29th. This was due to, we were contacted by potential bidders. There are some very specific items that they have to include in their bids related to the prefabricated pedestrian bridge that will be installed as part of this project, and the need to get estimates for the engineering of that bridge was adding to the typical time that would be needed. So we did go ahead and extend that, and also probably extend it a little further than we would have normally because of the Thanksgiving holiday. So November 29th is the new bid opening. So we're anxious to see the results of that. And this will be to award the funding for construction. That's the combination of the active transportation program funds and the Caltrans SHOP funding. So just a couple weeks delay, so shouldn't put us too far off track as far as our schedule. And then we'll be getting into the full construction. There'll be some pre-construction items happening over the fall and winter, and then full construction starting next construction season. So that's a project update. Any questions on that before we move on to the discussion of the cash flow? No? Okay. So we are anticipating that there will be some pretty hefty invoices that we have to pay from the construction contractor, one of them being that prefabricated bridge. And so this is funded through the active transportation and SHOP programs. However, those programs operate on a reimbursable basis. So we will have to pay those invoices, then submit requests for reimbursement from Caltrans. And so in order to have the cash flow to pay those contractor invoices in a timely manner, we needed to have authorization to loan amongst our MCOG accounts. So I will turn it over to Janet to get into the details of that.
Thank you, Nafili. So the council has 15 different fund accounts. They all have strings attached. There's really only one place to look for fund balances of the size that we need. And you've got my written staff report here. We're looking at the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, formerly known as the Regional Surface Transportation Program. It's either called RSTP or more recently the STBG. MCOG, by its own policy, has 3 different programs that we run out of that fund. We have the, right off the top, the Partnership Funding Program, and that's what's been providing match funds for this project to date. We have the Local Assistance Program, and that funds the staff position that Michael Bia just filled. And the largest, about 3/4 of the fund, is the formula distribution to the 5 member agencies, parties to the joint powers. So there's generally about $2 million in that fund, mostly because, you know, the entities don't all claim their formula funds all at once. They don't do it every year necessarily, and sometimes accumulate quite a bit. We have about 800,000 a year coming into that fund. And it is the main thing here, aside from the size of the fund balance, is it's the most discretionary funds that we do have. So it's pretty broadly available for transportation purposes. So we're recommending that we look to that fund first. And the other place we're looking is at the reserve funds, and those are under the Transportation Development Act. Those are held in trust in the Local Transportation Fund for Mendocino Transit Authority. And one is, we call our LTF reserve, and that is for in the event of any shortfalls, or, you know, say if the revenue doesn't come in and meet the budget estimate, or if MTA has any extraordinary costs, fuel spikes, things like that. So that's available for them to claim. We've got more than ever set aside in that fund right now. This budget year, I think it's 771,000 set aside, and that's 15% of the budget estimate. The minimum is 5%. So there's a fair amount of money there. The other one is our capital reserve fund that we hold. Under TDA, we can reserve funds for 5 years tied to a 5-year capital program. So we have those two together, are somewhere over $1 million, closer to $1.5 million. We'd rather leave that alone if we can, but if necessary, that would be a secondary source that we're recommending. And the last place that we can look is the what are called the governmental or special revenue funds, and those are programs that actively run by MCOG. That's our planning program, our administration, and those kinds of things that are, our day-to-day programs. And there's not a whole lot of money in there. There's about $500,000 in that. So we're suggesting we leave those alone, look to these other two places, primarily the Surface Transportation Fund. That's the largest fund, most discretionary fund, and secondarily to the local transportation fund reserves. So that's our recommendation. Any questions on it?
Director Hashak.
Yeah, so Janet, what do you think the timeline for getting reimbursed from Caltrans would be?
Well, we're going to speed that up a lot more once we get this underway. We were invoicing for reimbursement maybe every 6 months, but we're thinking monthly. Am I right, James? Can you fill in here? We're going to try and have a faster turnaround and bill more often. So
yeah, we're going to do it monthly. And
yeah.
One of the things in talking with Caltrans, we can send them, I can prepare the invoice and send it to them for review. And then as soon as we send proof of payment, I'll just send that to them. So they'll already have reviewed the numbers. And then all they got to do is, see that we've actually paid it, and then they can go ahead and process it. So it should make it a lot faster.
So are we talking like a month or 4 months?
It's tended to be about 2.5, 3 weeks from when I submit it to when we get payment, as long as there's no questions. And so that's why submitting the sort of a draft invoice every time is going to help, speed that along.
Okay, so if we use the Surface Transportation block grant and it has 2 million in it, we should be good for the 800,000 each month.
Yes, we should, that should be sufficient. And I don't think that every invoice, we're not going to have every invoice be at that high amount. It'll sort of depend on where we are in the process, but probably near the beginning and near the end is when we'll have the biggest invoices that we have to pay. We can't invoice Caltrans more frequently than once a month. So if there are some big expenses that we're putting it out, at the beginning of that 1 month period, then, we'll have to wait until we can submit an invoice, and then whatever the turnaround time is. But yeah, probably it shouldn't be more than about a 2 month period before the funds are replenished by our reimbursement from Caltrans.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, I've noticed that once we have a vetted invoice in, the turnaround time to get that check is really pretty fast, this couple of weeks. And also, we're going to make sure that we're not billing for anything that's not allowable. We've got our construction management firm on board, the resident engineering services, that will, be working with the project to make sure that we're only being billed for allowable costs. And so it should go pretty smoothly. Fingers crossed. So that's our expectation.
Okay. Do we have any other questions or comments from members of the public?
Yes, this is Sabrina Rodriguez. I am the MTA chair, and I just need a clarifying question. How long would MCOG be borrowing from these funds? My phone cut out a little bit, and I wasn't sure. I heard something about a monthly repayment, and then I thought I heard something about paying it back in a month. Could you clarify, please?
Sure. So we can submit, or we will submit requests for reimbursement to Caltrans once a month. We can't submit them more frequently than that. And then once we submit that request to them, it's about a 2 to 3 week turnaround before we receive that reimbursement from Caltrans. So depending on when our actual, when we incur that expense, if we're paying a contractor invoice towards the beginning of that, 1 month period between invoices, it could be 2 to 3 weeks before we're submitting the request for reimbursement to Caltrans, and then another 2 to 3 weeks for turnaround. So not more than 2 months before we receive the reimbursement.
Okay, and one more clarifying question. is there a suggestion for a cap on how much you would be borrowing of those funds that are available?
We have not made a suggestion. We certainly the board could propose a cap. It's not something that we have proposed, really just because, you know, we don't anticipate that it'll be more than what we have identified here. However, we do want to be able to pay contractor invoices. You know, it's something that we would be required to do in our contracts is pay the contractors within a timely manner. So we don't want to hold those up in case there is some issue with a Caltrans reimbursement.
Okay, I was just concerned about if there could be, for any of those agencies like MTA that use those funds that maybe have a big project coming up ourselves, if it would put us at risk of not having funds available, if that's a risk factor. And that was my question. Thank you.
Sure. And so I can maybe help clarify that a little bit. The funds that we're talking about using for cash flow. So the one that would that MTA would tap into, first of all, that would be our secondary account for cash flow, and it is the operating reserve that's held by MCOG. So it's not even money that MTA has in their budget. And Janet, correct me if I'm wrong here, but so it's not something it's not something that MTA would be using or tapping into on a regular basis. It would only be in extreme circumstances. Then they might submit a revised claim for those funds. So it wouldn't be impacting day-to-day needs of any of MTA or other agencies.
Right, and I believe in this fiscal year, there are no allocations for the capital reserve fund. It's all in the subsequent 4 years. I don't think we'd see immediate needs for that. MTA is the only one who has claim on those reserves. And I think there'd be time to resolve any borrowing and also get MTA's money if needed. And we'd like to avoid using those funds if we can.
Okay, thank you. Director Hashak.
Well, if that's the end of public comments, I will move the recommended action.
Ignacio seconds.
Okay, thank you. We've got a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call?
Yes, Director Brown,
Yes.
Director Connie, I see Director Connie. Are you?
Sorry, yes.
I can't hear you. That's a yes.
I was just hearing from Sabrina to see if she had any further questions, but she's good. So thank you.
Okay. And Director Alvin Smith?
Yes.
Director Ignacio?
Yes.
Director Haschak?
Yes.
Director Carter?
Yes.
Director Alstrand?
Yes.
And Chair Judy?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Can we have a
Carried.
motion to recess as the Policy Advisory Committee, reconvene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, and ratify the actions of the Policy Advisory Committee?
So moved.
Second.
Just to confirm, do we have any public comment on this action? Not seeing any. Can we have a roll call?
Okay, Director Brown?
Yes.
Connie?
Yes.
Alvin Smith? I can't hear Director Alvin Smith. She's on mute.
Unmute. Keep trying to unmute. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Haschak,
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
and
Yes.
Judy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ignacio is a yes too.
Got it. Thank you very much.
On reports, do we have any updates from Caltrans?
Hi, I just have one quick update, a follow-up from our meeting last month. Last month, Julia, our Clean California coordinator, talked about the loss of Boonville as a beautification project for the Caltrans component of the Clean California funding. That was due to the timing of the public works projects going on there. But it sounds like we're proposing a replacement project at the Bruel Vista Point south of Westport. The project would likely include repaving or refurbishing of the pavement, adding picnic tables, native plantings, interpretive signs, decorative trash cans, and a dog waste station, and also might include art on the picnic tables. So it's currently being proposed to headquarters, and once it's all approved, it'll go to design with plans to construct next summer. And we're also looking for help engaging the public for public input on the design. So we'll be hopefully working with MCOG for guidance on how to reach the community and stakeholders. Thank you.
Tasha, thank you for the update. We also have a municipal advisory council for Westport. Okay, so they're probably one of our best options for getting input.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. And if anybody else has any other ideas, please let me know. Thank you.
Okay. Not seeing any additional questions or comments. Any reports from MTA?
None.
Okay. Great Redwood Trail.
Yeah, we had a special meeting on October 31st, and we had just heard about the ruling from the Surface Transportation Board, granting the right of way or the rail banking for the Great Redwood Trail from Willits North. There was 13 miles of disputed track there. And so the ruling was in favor of the Great Redwood Trail, and we can move forward with that. We also voted to remove the 17 rail cars at the Willits depot, and that will happen shortly. And it won't affect the operations of the skunk train. So that's pretty much it from the Great Redwood Trail. I think Senator McGuire had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, a town hall. I think there were like 2,500 people who attended the virtual meeting. So there's a lot of interest in it.
Okay, thank you for the update. We're on to MCOG staff.
Okay, so you have the summary of meetings report in the packet. I don't have anything specifically to call out on that, but I'm happy to answer any questions. All right, not hearing any. And we'll move on to the 2023 Active Transportation Program Grant Awards CTC staff recommendations. So a couple of weeks ago, the CTC staff recommendations for the statewide and small urban and rural portion of the Active Transportation Program was released, and I am very excited to report that the Wallala Downtown Streetscape project was included in the list of projects recommended for funding. So it's not official yet. This will be adopted by the CTC at their December 7th and 8th meeting, but we feel pretty confident that it will be included in that final list of projects. Typically, when something's in the staff recommendations, it stays on that list. So we'll be putting out a formal announcement following the CTC approval of the project list, but we're thrilled that that was funded. So it is $7,780,000, I believe, is the grant, the Active Transportation Program grant amount. And so we'll be working with Caltrans to move forward on that project. It is still, I believe, the construction year under the Active Transportation Program is still 2025, I believe, is when the construction is programmed for. Yes, 2025. Sorry, I just had to confirm that. So it's great news, and it was really a collaborative effort between MCOG, staff, Loretta and James both put in a lot of time on that, and Caltrans, Tasha, and several other Caltrans staff members really put in an effort on that grant application. They are rather daunting applications, so it was very rewarding to see that successful. So that's our announcement.
Nafili, if approved, would the nearly $8 million fund the entirety of the construction project, or would there still be any remaining components?
So hopefully it would fund the entirety of the construction project. Exceptions, I think, would be if there are items of the project that would not be eligible for active transportation program funding. I do not currently know of any components of the project that have been identified as ineligible, so I'm not expecting that, but that would be the only thing. And then, of course, you know, construction prices, it's hard to tell in 3 years when construction's happening, what'll be happening with construction prices. But as far as, you know, what we know right now, based on current estimates, it should cover everything.
Do we have any questions? Not seeing any. Okay.
All right, well, that is that report. I do not have any miscellaneous items for admin.
Okay, then we're on to the planning staff.
Good afternoon. I have two brief reports on current planning projects. The first one is the feasibility study for the mobility solutions for rural communities of inland Mendocino County. I reported to you last month. So to refresh your memory, this is a Caltrans funded grant, a planning grant, that study in the remote rural communities of Covelo, Laytonville, Brook Trail, Topland, and Potter Valley, looking at potential mobility solutions and alternatives to traditional transit service in these hard to serve areas. I don't have a lot to report since last month. The survey is ongoing. I'm happy to report that it's been successful in that we've seen some pretty high numbers of completed surveys. I asked the consultant team today for an update, and I was told we've had over 335 surveys completed, 300 of which the respondents have provided the location, so we can use those with our analysis. So we feel that's a really good response rate based on transportation surveys in the past. So we're happy about that. And the consultant team is looking at the input from the surveys, looking at analyzing the feasibility of specific solutions in each community. And a second household mailer was sent out since I reported to you last month. And that mailer has a QR code that's directing people to the survey. And, you know, we want you all to, when you have opportunity, to direct your constituents to the MCOG webpage. That's where the survey can be found. If they don't have that QR code handy, or they don't have the social pinpoint website handy, the MCOG homepage, which is mendocinocog.org, has the survey right there on the homepage. So anyway, that project's going well. I met with the consultants last week, and Nafili did also. And then earlier we had a chance to meet regarding a potential grant program that's going to open up next year that could possibly fund some of these solutions. So we're looking at that, and the consultant is willing to advance giving us their final deliverable by a few months if that would help us apply for funding. So we're looking into that. But either way, the project's on track to be finished next summer if we don't advance it. So that's the first one, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on that.
Loretta, I have a question. On this mobility solutions for rural inland county, part of the county, inland communities, is it looking at one possibility being rideshare?
That is a possibility, yes.
Okay. Because I know some of us remember I don't know, over 10 years ago, probably, or about 10 years ago, MTA had a grant for a few years that they were to coordinate. This is before Uber and before Lyft, that they were attempting to coordinate drivers, but then the drivers had to be certified, their vehicles had to be certified, and they were, I think they at no time did they have more than one driver in the northern part of the county, Laytonville, Covelo area. And it just seems with the evolution of that trend of Lyft coming on the scene and Uber and other platforms, that there might be some way of even if it took a subsidy to kind of get one of those companies to come in and serve an area. Again, maybe there's a way of providing some sort of subsidy for those rides that it could provide extend service where it just doesn't make economic sense to have, fixed route transit.
Yes, and that is among the slate of options that they're looking at. They are gearing the solutions specific toward each community, based partly on those listening sessions that they conducted in each community in August, listening to the public saying what types of services they needed. So that is one of the items that's being discussed.
Any other questions on that item?
Okay, I'll go into the next report, and this is on a feasibility study to conduct a study and location analysis to evaluate potential locations for a new transit center in the greater Ukiah area. And this planning project is not grant funded. It's funded in MCOG's current work program, all with LTF planning funds for $150,000 for a consultant study. The RFP procurement process is nearly complete. We received 2 proposals in response to our RFP, which were evaluated by MCOG staff and MTA staff. The top firm, we're currently in the process of finalizing contracting details with the top ranked firm. We expect to have a contract signed next week with a kickoff meeting shortly thereafter, and we'll be able to report to you more on that in the next 2 months. But we just want to let you know that that's in the works. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Loretta.
Thank you.
Not seeing any additional comments or questions. And if so, that takes us to MCOG director reports. Any reports? Director Hashak.
Well, yeah, Caltrans has been working on a streetscape, or what a beautiful streetscapes, whatever they're calling the program, in Covelo. And they were working on one in Anderson Valley, and then that didn't happen for some reason. But so they've had several meetings so far about it with the community, and they're going to have a walkthrough on November 16th about looking at the downtown and how to do some traffic calming measures and beautify it. And so, so the public's welcome. I think it starts around 2 o'clock for the walk around. And it's just, there's a lot of excitement in the community about that, along with the multi-purpose trail.
Thanks for the update. Okay, well, if there's no other reports, we'll be adjourned to 26.
I think we had one more, just the CalCog.
Oh,
if there's
okay.
anything there. Maybe there's nothing to talk about, but there is upcoming the leadership forum. They're going to be back in person in March in Riverside. So we do have travel budget if any of you would like to go.
Yes, and the next CalCog board meeting is coming right up on November 29th. I did reach out to CalCog to see if they were going to offer a hybrid meeting option. It is currently scheduled as an in-person meeting in San Jose. So they are looking into hybrid if they can offer a quality hybrid experience, I guess. So hopefully we'll have an answer on that in the next couple of days.
I think I'll jump in on that. I saw a GoToMeeting link. So it sounds like it is virtual option. Maybe I misread that, but there was a GoToMeeting link on that.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So you might have more up-to-date information than I do. Maybe they've got that worked out.
I'm not going to San Jose.
Okay.
I think that's all we have now.
Great. All right. Well, then we're adjourned at 2:27.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.